Hello everyone, so we are going to review Chapter 9 on intelligence. Um, so when we're kind of dealing with issues of intelligence, one of the big problems is as far as defining it, what is it, how does it exist, how do we assess it, how do we measure it, and these are things that we are going to cover as we move through this section. So with our first intelligence test, they were designed to actually try to help identify where students were performing compared to other individuals in their age group. So if you were an 8-year-old reading at a 6-year-old level, the process of this was to help figure out how do we get you the help to get you to get back or to get up to an 8-year-old reading level. It started out without being laid in really any firm theoretical grounding. However, as we've gotten better understandings of intelligence, there is quite a bit of theory behind it now. A couple of notes on IQ scores is, while people kind of push back against some of these ideas, there is a correlation, a pretty strong correlation to performance in school and IQ scores. Individuals with higher IQ scores usually tend to perform better in school, where individuals with lower IQ scores tend to perform poorer in school. Other correlates that are out there is there are correlates to IQ scores and car wrecks. People with higher IQ scores have fewer car wrecks, and people with lower IQ scores tend to have more. This could be for a number of reasons, not necessarily that more intelligent people are better drivers. It may be cognitive processing speed and things like this. And another correlate that's out there is that IQ scores are correlated with earned income. People with higher IQs tend to have higher incomes. So here are a couple of definitions of intelligence. I'm not going to read them to you. I'm just going to leave this slide here for a few minutes for you to read over yourself. And as you see, there's a number of different concepts that are here. It's understand objects and symbols, how to deal with people, how to judge, how to comprehend, how to act purposefully and think rationally. And these themselves now become kind of difficult because we have to figure out how to operationally define those terms. So it makes the concept of intelligence, kind of this mystery of figuring things out. And there are some pretty efficient models of the way that we describe it and look at it today. So one of our first people to present kind of an idea of intelligence was Charles Spearman, who gave us this concept of G and S. G stands for generalized intelligence factors, which is just kind of generally how well do you do, what's your performance level. S is your more specific intelligence attributes. So when we're looking at these, and please don't think that these are the only 4 S's. This Venn diagram is just an example. It could be mathematical ability, it could be reading ability, it could be social ability. What ends up happening is these all overlap to give us our G, which is our general intelligence. So G, kind of has this overall performance prediction and ability, and then we look at these more site-specific ones. And what gets tricky about this is, kind of giving this graphic here, this analogy to like fitness level. Someone that has an S that's really fast, like in our top diagram, may also be able to jump farther because their speed makes their ability to jump farther stronger, as well as be able to jump higher. So if we look at someone that has like a reading comprehension S that is really strong, then their ability to retain history information may be better, or their ability to, even when they're reading an algebra book, to retain this information may also be better. So S's are more specific ones, and G is our general. So his theory is monarchic in the sense of that G dominates these lesser S abilities. So when we're looking at kind of, what does G represent, it may be your overall GPA or your ability to interact with others. And then when we get into S, we may look at specific classes like reading or history, and then maybe your mathematical S is low, and so you don't have great performance in math, but you have A's in the other classes. Raymond Cattell brought us this concept of fluid and crystallized intelligence. And what he's arguing is that fluid intelligence is your ability to kind of deal with novel situations and your ability to problem solve and apply it into these situations. Where crystallized intelligence is where you become kind of, quote unquote, an expert in a certain thing. As we're moving through talking about crystallized and fluid intelligence, please don't think that there's a specific timeline. It's not 6 months or 3 months or 5 years that crystallizes your intelligence. It's just that when you've kind of become this expert, you have this crystallized intelligence. And then fluid is more the adaptation of learning to apply it in different contexts. If we use math as an example, your fluid intelligence is where you're learning to add and subtract and divide. And then when we get into like a crystallized process, this may be doing more complex algebra applications. So fluid intelligence would be, learning the skill in a new game, or crystallized would be where you become kind of, quote unquote, an expert in that particular thing. So like I mentioned before, this is not an absolute. There's not a specific timeline. Some people get it faster than others. Some people are just more adept at certain things than others. And so fluid intelligence is your ability to apply it to kind of these new situations, where crystallized is you've become an expert in that particular subject matter. Howard Gardner brought us this concept of multiple intelligence. And what Gardner where he went a little bit from the idea of the mainstream, where a lot of intelligence stuff is looking at in an academic performance setting, Gardner looked at intelligence in multiple facets. So, some of these are social intelligence and some of these are emotional intelligence, as well as your academic processes as well. So this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just some concepts that he's had of language abilities, musical abilities, logic and reasoning, spatial reasoning, kinesthetic intelligence, which is like your ability to understand your body in space. So if we look at elite athletes, we may argue that they have a higher rate of kinesthetic ability, that they can make more intuitive movements instead of having to really kind of process and think about what they're doing in that particular moment. Intrapersonal is someone's understanding of their own emotions and how their emotions affect them. So we would argue that people with low intrapersonal intelligence are ones that react highly to emotionally evoking stimuli, and people with high intrapersonal intelligence are aware when they're starting to become angry and don't lash out. Interpersonal is someone's ability to deal with other people with social sensitivity and to pick up on these cues. So someone with interpersonal intelligence is able to identify maybe when other people are getting angry and to back off. So, according to Gardner, we have these people that may excel in one area while they, suffer in others. And this is where savants come in, is you may see some people that are have this one really high skill for mathematics or for mechanics or things like that, and then everything else is at a baseline, at an average, or maybe even below average when we're dealing with savant type skills. For example, you may have some people that have what's referred to as perfect pitch. So for musical intelligence, they're individuals that can pick up an instrument and play a song almost immediately. This would be a savant type skill, while all their other intelligence levels are pretty average. So when we're dealing with some of these savant skills and average IQs, some of the stuff that's going on with Gardner, this is hard to quantify. It's really hard to give someone how do you recognize your own emotions and react to them or not react to them scale, or how do you deal with other people scale. And to give a whole complete test of Gardner's, we'd have to figure out your musical ability and your kinesthetic ability and your intrapersonal ability and your extrapersonal ability, on top of all the kind of quote unquote academic intelligences that fall in here as well. And then there's Sternberg that brings us a triarchic theory. And what Sternberg argues in the triarchic theory is that there are three kind of components of intelligence. One, your cognitive processes. How do you actually process this information while you're doing your problem solving? And then two is we look at the situation that it's employed in. So going back to the last chapter when we were talking about kind of testing, it's, part of the situations change if we give you a multiple choice test versus true false versus free recall. These are all going to vary, which have an effect on your ability to retain or recall this information. And then there's the kind of relationship of putting this to the external world. So once you figure out how to do something and now we throw you on an internship or a job, can you put that application into your work? And Sternberg argues we kind of need all three parts of this. You have to have the cognitive processing, the understanding of it. We have to give the situation for you to apply it in, and then we have to have some type of external application for you to do this. So when we look at kind of the process here, it's learning the information, identifying a problem solved, and then combining these to get your solution. So what Sternberg starts thinking about is this process of how do we take kind of what you've picked up in the classroom and put it into the outside world. So Sternberg argues an intelligent person can adapt, improve, or escape from a different environment using the tools that they've picked up before. Not to date myself too much here, but this is kind of like a MacGyver type individual. They're able to take this information that they learned in school or wherever and help get out of situations. Or if you've ever watched Burn Notice, this guy also does this a lot, where he gives you this like basic chemistry lesson on how to do these different things. So now looking at kind of the development of IQ tests and IQ test assessments and their application. So our first IQ test came from Binet and Simon, who were employed by or recruited by the French government to identify children with intellectual deficiencies and help. It was designed to help them get the help they needed to move up to kind of being on par with students of their age. The term that came out of here is intelligence quotient, or IQ, and the way that it is designed is you're at an IQ of 100 if your level of performance matches that of someone of your age. So if you're 10 years old and you perform mathematically and reading at a 10-year-old level, you have an IQ of 100. If you're 10 years old and you perform at a 7-year-old level, you have an IQ below 100. And if you're 10 years old and maybe you're performing at a 15-year-old level, you would have an IQ over 100. This was adopted by Terman at Stanford University when it came to the U.S. So the way that the Stanford Binet test works, or the IQ test works, is items get more difficult as you move up through it. If you've ever taken the GRE or you're thinking about grad school, this is how the GRE is built. They start with baseline questions, and then as you get them right, they add harder questions. The Wechsler Intelligence Scale was designed by David Wechsler, and this is probably the most prominent IQ test that's used today. There's the WISC, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, and then there's the WAIS, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. And just like the Simon Binet or Stanford Binet, it's designed on this 100-point scale, and it is updated and revised frequently, like many other testing metrics, to stay current with knowledge and performance. So there's verbal and performance scores that have 6 subscales. Now what's pretty awesome about the Wechsler, to help save money on like MRIs or very expensive neurocognitive assessments, the WAIS can identify some cognitive issues that may be occurring as a result of possibly substance abuse or TBIs or someone being concussed. So aside from it being an intelligence assessment, it does allow us to start to look at potential damage that's done for individuals. The Ravens progressive matrices came along because there are some individuals that argued that their IQ tests that are out there are culturally biased, and so the Ravens progressive matrices was designed to try to reduce this concept of cultural bias. And so here's kind of a graphic of what the progressive matrices look like. And what it does is it progresses from easier to more difficult puzzles to solve. Now, one kind of problem with the progressive matrices is it's just this. It's your ability to kind of identify patterns and move through these. And there are many other things that are kind of missed through the progressive matrices. However, it's an attempt to adjust for cultural bias that may exist. So, all our IQ tests, they have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, they have different purposes and applications. And also understanding what intelligence does helps us improve, as well as people that are doing these assessments.